Hello everyone, Alvin's here. Nah, buat hari ini kita akan membicarakan tentang FX30. Nah, FX30 ini adalah sinema kamera baru keluaran dari Sony yang menggunakan sensor APS-C atau Super 35. FX30 ini memiliki sensor yang berukuran 26 megapiksel dengan 1,5 kali crop karena dia itu APS-C atau Super 35. Walaupun dia ini sinema kamera, tapi FX30 ini dapat digunakan untuk foto juga. Jadi kinda hybrid, tapi kita fokusnya lebih ke videonya karena kameranya dia cuma punya electronic shutter, nggak punya mechanical shutter. Jadi kalau kita mau menggunakan flash atau apa jadi rada lebih susah. Lalu dia juga nggak ada viewfinder. Kalau secara desain, layout, dan ergonomiknya sendiri, FX30 ini sama persis dengan FX3 atau FX3 versi full frame sinema kamera yang keluaran dari Sony sebelumnya. Untuk kodeknya sendiri, FX30 ini memiliki 4K recording tapi oversample dari 6K sensor. Jadi biasanya gambarnya juga lebih detail. Lalu pilihan kodeknya sendiri pun juga ada all intra atau long GOP. Tapi sayangnya yang gue cek di FX30 ini nggak ada pilihan ProRes, sayang sekali, apalagi ini sinema lainnya dari Sony. Lalu ada informasi tambahan di mode 120 fps nya FX30 ini ada crop tambahan lagi 1,5. Jadi kalian harus memperhatikan baik-baik karena ada crop lagi. Dan dari pengumuman dari Sony pun FX30 ini juga kompatibel dengan top handle-nya FX3 dan audio modul dari FX3 itu sendiri yang membuat sinema kamera ini benar-benar compact dan bagus untuk run and gun buat kalian, apalagi misalkan yang one man band atau one man show buat produksi video kalian. Mungkin ini merupakan pilihan yang tepat. FX30 ini atau FX30 ini memiliki fitur yang dimiliki juga di A74, yaitu focus breathing compensation. Jadi bikin misalkan lensa kalian ada focus breath yang lumayan not good, fitur ini bikin focus breathingnya jadi nggak kelihatan walaupun kamera kalian bakal kena crop lagi. Lalu di FX30 ini juga yang menarik adalah kita bisa mengupload custom LUT di dalam bodinya sendiri, jadi membuat shooting sendiri lebih enak. Berdasarkan informasi dari Sony, FX30 ini dibilang dapat memberikan output 16 bit recording, tapi menurut gue itu cuma gimmick yang buat menjual kamera ini karena sampai saat ini belum ada external recorder yang dapat merekam 16 bit. Jadi ya anggap aja itu cuma marketing sementara. Overall FX30 ini merupakan sinema kamera termurah dari Sony yang keluarin saat ini, bahkan bisa dibilang termurah di pasarnya saat ini karena kalau berdasarkan dolar harganya masih di harga $1.500 ketika yang lain kebanyakan sinema atau yang punya kemampuan seperti sinema kamera itu di atas $2.000. Tapi Sony mengeluarkan ini di harga yang $1.500 yang membuat ini jadi harga kompetitif banget. Dan untuk siapakah FX30 ini? Kalau berdasarkan spek yang ada, menurut gue filmmaker run and gun yang one band show menurut gue target audiens yang paling tepat. Lalu kedua, content creator dan para YouTuber atau vloggers karena kamera ini kecil jadi lumayan compact. Kedua, Sony mempunyai class leading autofocus sampai saat ini yang menurut gue masih paling bagus kayaknya untuk autofocus. Nah, untuk downside-nya sendiri berdasarkan artikel yang gue temuin atau video review yang ada atau berdasarkan dari pendapat gue sendiri, downside-nya ada beberapa. Contoh pertama, belum ada mode di atas 4K, padahal ini kan sensor 6K aturan atau misalkan DCI 4K. Lalu nggak ada anamorphic mode, dan apalagi untuk sinema kamera menurut gue nggak ada open gate recording itu sangat disayangkan, yang mungkin bisa dikeluarkan di firmware update selanjutnya. Dalam masalah profesional set pun ya tergantung beberapa orang. Menurut gue kodek ProRes itu sangat menyenangkan, fitur yang bagus untuk di sinema kamera, apalagi sinema kamera, karena membuat workflow pun lebih cepat walaupun dengan file yang lebih gede. Dan untuk dibilang Sinema kamera pun sebenarnya ada beberapa fitur ASIS yang menurut gue masih disayangkan karena belum muncul, seperti waveform atau vector scope, karena kedua fitur tersebut lumayan membantu ketika kita mau syuting, terutama untuk bikin film atau apa. Menurut gue itu kepake. Dan sayangnya di FX30 ini belum ada. Dan ya terutama menurut gue yang paling rada kurang enak itu juga di mode 120 fps-nya itu ada cropping 1,5 kali lagi tambahan. Dan go warning, ini sudah di sensor APS-C alias sudah croppingan dari full frame, abis itu kena cropping lagi. Jadi harus hati-hati. Itu preview yang gue bisa kasih sekarang karena gue tidak punya unitnya, jadi gue lebih ke memberikan pendapat gue aja terhadap kamera baru dari Sony ini. So jangan lupa like and subscribe dan leave a comment kalau menurut kalian FX30 ini menarik. Keep craving, keep learning. Alvin out. See you next time. Bye bye.
useful, and again, is something I want to see added to those other two cameras as well, along with the animal eye AF. There's also this new thing called Focus Map, which gives you a color-coded display of what's in front of focus on the focal plane and what's behind, but I find it busy and hard to look at and don't really care to use it. When it comes to image quality, I already mentioned that you're getting a 7K oversample in the full frame modes, but due to the increased resolution of the sensor, you're also getting a slight oversample in 4K 60 as well, around 4.6K I believe, giving this camera the sharpest image and video available for Sony, save for the 8K mode on the A1. This oversampling also reduces the impact of noise in your low light scenes, which contributed to this camera scoring a 12.8 in my dynamic range test with Imatest and the Xala 21. This is using the new, more challenging scoring method that CineD helped me with, and in that it actually scored about a third of a stop better than the A7S III, putting it right in line with the A1, which again is a huge upgrade for an A7 III owner. I was actually quite impressed with the noise performance on this camera. If we move through the ISO range in S-Log3, which starts at a base of ISO 800, we can see the second native ISO kick in at 3200 and then remain impressively clean up past 12,800. I'd feel comfortable using this camera as high as 25,600 in many situations. However, at 32,000, it completely falls apart, but still, overall, very impressive. And the color matches nicely with the A7S III and A1 as well. As usual, when you're dealing with a new sensor, there's slight differences in the white balance. The A7S III leans a bit green, the A1 a bit magenta, and this new camera is somewhere in the middle. But these are very minor shifts, and if you custom white balance each camera separately, they turn out to be extremely close color-wise, and mixing the footage shouldn't be a problem. And because it offers all the new codec options as well, including 10-bit 422, you can comfortably shoot in S-Log3 and not worry about the image falling apart like it did on the A7 III. Speaking of those codecs, this camera has H.264 and H.265, and it even has all-intro recording, which is something I wasn't expecting and was pleasantly surprised with. The card slots are slightly different though. There's only one of the A7S III's dual bays that feature both a CF Express Type A and SD slot. The second bay is just an SD card slot, but both of them are UHS-2. The 4K 30 mode is much improved as well if you're coming from an A7 III. First off, there's no crop, and your autofocus isn't affected. And they've even increased the bit rate when you increase frame rate, which makes sense and is much better than the previous generation of cameras. And although 4K 60 has a crop, you can still enable active stabilization in that mode, which is nice, as this camera features the same great stabilization modes of the A7S III. And if you're coming from an A7 III, rest assured, there's none of that silly HDMI stuff where your face detection stops working or one of your screens goes black if you dual record. But it still does have the issue that I think all Sony cameras have, where you lose the camera screen if you output your on-screen display info onto an external monitor. I wish they would fix this. A couple smaller improvements I've noticed that actually make a pretty big difference. This is the first Sony camera I've used that you can effortlessly bring up your battery life if you're running a minimalist display. On every other camera, the battery icon disappears after a few seconds, and there's only a couple ways that you can bring it back up. Either by cycling through your display modes until you get the one with all the stuff on it, or what I do, enter and exit the menu quickly. This camera, you can bring it up by half pressing the shutter or pressing AF on, or a bunch of other much easier ways, and I really appreciate this. And they've also added an AF assist function in video mode that feels a lot like a DMF mode in photo, basically letting you manual focus override at any point during continuous autofocus for video. This is a handy tool, but it does bring with it one interface change compared to the A7S III or A1. On those cameras, if you turn on focus peaking, you only see it when the lens is in manual focus mode. On this camera, when focus peaking is on, you see it in both modes, manual or autofocus. I assume this is to help with that new AF assist override function, but it took some getting used to. And if you're looking to use this camera as a webcam as well, the whole experience has been upgraded. So first off, when you plug in a USB cable to this, now it will bring up a prompt so you can choose what kind of USB mode you want to use, whether it's data transfer or not. And one of those options will be to use it as a webcam. And as soon as you choose that, it is a hassle-free universal webcam device recognized by your computer. And then the resolution and frame rate modes have been improved as well. I think on the previous Sony webcam versions, it was a 720p cap. Now you can shoot 1080p all the way up to 60 frames per second and 4K at 15 frames per second if you plan to use that. But that 1080p 60 and the ease of use makes this actually a really viable webcam now. So as you can see for video, this camera is literally nothing but upgrades compared to the A7 III. And it matches or beats the A7S III in color, dynamic range, detail, and autofocus performance. And due to the lower second native ISO, it offers a much cleaner middle ISO range of 3200 to 6400 compared to the A7S III. And it offers added versatility with an APS-C crop mode. The only areas where the A7S III takes back big wins is in the high frame rate modes, which are uncropped and go all the way to 120p on that camera. And of course in the rolling shutter, which is terrific on the A7S III and kind of lousy on the A7 IV, which of course had me a bit worried about the vlogging capabilities of this camera. So earlier this week, I took it out for a vlog test, and here's how that looked. I've got the camera set up with an ND on because we're going to go outside. I've got the ISO set to auto ISO, and I've put exposure compensation to plus 1.7 stops because we're shooting an S-Log3, and I think that usually gives you the best balance between, noise reduction, and I also have auto white balance on. This is the 20mm Sony 20mm f1.8, and I've got the camera's focus breathing compensation turned on. So it's a little bit tighter so that the 20mm doesn't focus breathe. And it's doing a really good job of that. Stabilization right now is just set to standard. I'll switch it to active a little bit later on. So I'm just going to walk through the studio and see how it adjusts to the changing exposure and white balances. Over here, I'm being lit by just some, household tungsten colored fixtures, and the ISO jumped up to 10,000. And then I'm going to jump through here and go through the studio, which is daylight balanced. And we're getting about a 2500 ISO because, again, I have a 2-stop ND on while on the variable. And then if I walk over here, I'm going to be lit by a window, which should have kind of a cooler light today, and it's ISO 3200, and this is window light from outside. Now let's go outside and see how it works. Okay, so we're outside now, and I've got the 5 stops on the ND now, and the ISO is ranging between 800 and 1250, depending on, whether I'm covered by a tree or not. And I'm using the eye detect autofocus, and again, standard stabilization. So far, so good. Again, this camera does have sort of a rolling shutter problem, so we'll see if the stabilization is enough to compensate for that, somewhat not great rolling shutter. If I kind of, move it around a little bit, obviously, don't do that, but it's probably pretty jello-y. Okay, let's switch it over to active stabilization and just sort of monitor everything all at once while I tell you about today's sponsor, Storyblocks. All right, we've got the complete package now. Active stabilization, autofocus, auto ISO, auto white balance. Here we go. Sponsor read. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you could really use some footage, but shooting yourself was either budgetarily or logistically unfeasible? Well, Storyblocks has you covered with an impressive collection of stock footage, covering a wide range of subjects with unlimited downloads and 4K video. They're also amply supplied with backgrounds, overlays, and After Effects templates. And the interface is easy to use and navigate, and the clips are royalty-free for both personal and commercial use, so you can use them as much as you want, wherever you want. So if you think you could take advantage of a fantastic library of quality stock footage and effects, check out Storyblocks using the link in the description below. So reviewing that footage, it was better than I expected. The rolling shutter issues were there, but the improved stabilization I think did make a difference compared to how these types of shots used to look on the A7 III. But I'll leave that final opinion up to you. What I can say though is that if you never had a problem with rolling shutter on the A7 III and enjoyed vlogging with it, there's nothing but upsides moving to this camera. But if you have the extra money, I still think the A7S III is the ultimate vlogging camera. Now, since I spent most of my time testing the video features of this camera, I'd like to throw to someone who had more of a chance to inspect the photo capabilities of the A7 IV. So let's see what portrait photographer Miguel Quiles has to say.
Thanks, Gerald. There's a lot to talk about with this new camera when it comes to the photography side of this conversation. If you are coming from the A7 III, there's a lot to love with the new A7 IV. First would be the improved ergonomics. I found the original A7 III to be a little uncomfortable to hold for long periods of time, mainly due to my pinky not really having anywhere to comfortably rest. Because of that, I would end up using a battery grip anytime that I used the A7 III, since it improved the ergonomics considerably. With the A7 IV, it has the same body style that I love from the Alpha 7R4 and the Alpha 1, which gives you a bit of a chunkier battery grip. This new body style was the first in the A7 lineup where I didn't run out and buy a battery grip right away, since I was able to comfortably hold the camera in either landscape or portrait orientations. The next thing that really stands out to me with the A7 IV is the benefits that come with the inclusion of the new Bionz XR processor. This new processor that was introduced with the A7S III and the Alpha 1 gives you access to some awesome benefits that photographers will enjoy. Things like improved real-time autofocus tracking could be a game changer for portrait photographers, especially those who rely on the eye autofocus feature like I do. Using wide area continuous autofocus with some of Sony's latest lenses really show how far mirrorless technology has come. Shooting portraits on location and in a studio at a variety of apertures gave me solid results. When you can leave a camera to take care of the technical side of taking a photo, especially when it comes to focusing, it's gonna open you up to focus on the more creative elements that can make a photo really stand out. I've been able to use Sony's cameras for over 6 years now, photographing people with a wide range of skin tones. When the A7R4 came out, there was something about the colors that, I don't know, that felt different than any other Sony camera that I had used up to that point. Skin tones in my RAW files look richer, and they seem to require a little bit less work in post-production, and I'm seeing the same benefit here with the A7 IV. Depending on the type of photography you're into, this benefit alone might be worth the upgrade. These days I mainly use the Alpha 1 as my main stills camera, so I'm a bit spoiled when it comes to my expectations of what a stills camera can do. With that said though, I think that photographers get many of the benefits in the A7 IV that the more expensive A1 offers. Things like the improved buffer speeds, faster and more accurate autofocus, the inclusion of the faster CF Express Type A card slot, the improved JPEG engine, and color science overall. You're really going to see the performance increases when you pair up the A7 IV with some of the newer lenses like the Sony 70-200 GM version 2 and their 50mm f1.2 GM. All of the benefits that I mentioned earlier with the increased 33 megapixel resolution and smaller file sizes compared to the R4 and the Alpha 1 make this a great value for anyone that's looking to get into full frame photography without compromise. The original A7 III really set the standard for what a basic full-frame camera can offer, and here they definitely step things into a whole new territory. If you want to hear more about using the A7 IV for stills, and specifically portrait photography, come check out the full video on my YouTube channel.
Big thanks to Miguel for providing that segment. Make sure you check out his video when you're done here. So I have played around a little bit with the photo mode on this camera, and I did notice a couple differences when compared to the A1 that will be familiar to A7 III users. The shutter is loud again when on mechanical mode. I forgot how loud these shutters were. I've become accustomed to the new flagships, I guess. But I also like how they've gone back to separating the mechanical shutter from the electronic front curtain and from the silent shutter mode on this camera. On the A1, those first two are combined. I prefer having them as separate options, and I like how they did that here. Of course, expectedly, the drive speed isn't as fast on this camera as the A1. This camera tops out at 10 frames per second, regardless of the shutter mode. I've also enjoyed having the flip screen for low shots in portrait orientation, which is something that I can't do too well on my A1 and that I've kind of missed. Summarizing this camera is difficult. I've been spoiled. I have an A7S III and two A1s. That's not a flex, that's just me pointing out that my opinion is probably warped. This camera doesn't offer me much that I don't already have, and in some cases it's just plain worse. I don't even have my original A7 III anymore. But I know a few things. I know that many of my viewers found the A7S III too expensive, or they could afford it but wanted more of a photography emphasis for that money. I know that when I reviewed the Panasonic S1, which is also $2,500 US, the same price as this new camera, I said that the S1, which also has a crop in 4K 60, was just one Sony autofocus system away from being the perfect camera for a lot of people. And finally, I know that if you're someone like me who got the A1 to get 8K oversampled footage for locked-off tripod shots at lower ISOs, but that wanted the versatility of using that camera for high-resolution stills with great autofocus when needed, someone for whom rolling shutter and 4K 60 doesn't play that big of a role, then this camera could actually easily replace both of my A1s, saving me $4,000 each. And on top of that, I'd gain the focus breathing correction, which is useful for this type of video. In fact, I'd even say that if you need good autofocus and shoot on a tripod, this camera offers the best image quality you can get for the money right now, period. So my summary would be the A7 IV, while not quite perfect, is a huge upgrade over its predecessor, worthy of its increased price tag, and in many practical usage scenarios, has enough tools to supplant even the flagship A1. But that's going to be it for me. I hope you found this video entertaining, or at least helpful, and if you did, make sure to give it the old thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you did not find this video helpful or entertaining, try setting the playback speed to 75%. Alright. I'm done.